thanks for tuning in. My name is Sonia Henry and I'm the music director here at Golden Sierra High School. I teach band and choir, and I'm here today to make a video to hopefully help my students who are working at home. I know it's very difficult to be practicing by yourself. You don't have anyone else to tune up with and to sing with. So hopefully today you'll learn some pointers about how to make better music. So I've titled this lesson, Perfect Practice Makes Perfect. Now, I know that most of you have heard the saying, practice makes perfect, but it's not true. I'm sorry to say, but if you're practicing the wrong thing or the wrong way, you'll actually develop really bad habits, and it takes more time to break a bad habit than it is to have learned it straight and properly the first time. So I'm going to guide you through. There are some certain things that we need to walk through, some fundamentals to cover, and then I have a secret sauce for you, a special way to actually practice to achieve higher goals and to gain greater musicianship. Okay, so let's get started. First thing is, there are two things you must establish, okay? Move that for you. Two things you must establish. One is what you practice. You must have certain fundamentals, and you must build your skills through exercises, and then also what kind of literature you use is going to help you to become a better musician. All right? And then the second part we're going to look at is how you practice, and good technique is one thing. Slow and accurate practice. This will be where I want to spend most of my time today, showing you how to practice slowly and accurately so that you become a better musician. And then consistently. If you practice regularly and consistency, you will become a better musician. All right, let's start with what you practice, the fundamentals, okay? So over here I have play from a method book for the fundamentals. Let me show you a couple of books I have on hand here. Most bands use this basic fundamental book. It's the one we're using in our classroom. This one is called Standard of Excellence, but there are many method books out there for band students. Other schools may be using this, Essential Elements, also an excellent band book. Most of these books are going to show you fingering charts, and they're going to diagram your instrument and show you the basic parts, what everything is called, how you maintain it. This is very important. And then method books always have the exercises at the beginning that show you how to tune up, how to play your first few notes, how to play those first few rhythms, and then also showing you how to play those first few notes. So this one actually diagrams by putting the letter name inside of the note until you learn it. So a method book is very basic and very helpful. Here's another one I recently got in the mail. It's also very nice. It's one I wouldn't mind using. This particular one is called Sound Innovations. It's also excellent. And here again, just like any method book, it has in the very back the fingerings for each and every note. And then in the front, of course, diagram of the instrument and its parts, proper seating, proper way to establish your embouchure, and then those beginning songs with just simple melodies, simple rhythm patterns. All the fundamentals are here. And then some books even come with a CD, or this same recordings may be found online. I've instructed all my students to go online, and I've given them a link to the manufacturer, and all of those recordings are there so you can actually play along with someone else. You can hear the band playing and know that you're on the right beat, playing the right melody, and hearing if you're in tune. So method books, so very, very important. So I've covered all this. I'm also learning the basic scales. Learning your basic scales helps you to be able to play in every key. You learn one, Then when you learn the pattern to your first major scale, it's easier to learn your second and your third and so on until you learn all your major scales. Later on, and probably in your second year or third year of playing an instrument, you start learning those minor scales, and then maybe if you get into jazz band, your blues scales, and other types of scales of modes. But the fundamentals are very important, and I recommend everyone have a method book. Now, if you are a pianist or a vocalist, there are method books for you as well. Most piano teachers prefer a certain method book, and they will guide you for that. If you're working on your own, you can just get a method book for piano. You can learn some basic things through that. And then for vocalists, there are not as many method books for vocalists. Almost always you need a private instructor or a choir teacher for that. But I do have a method book for my choir members, and we've been working through that, learning basic major scale and intervals, and identifying intervals on the staff, and learning what those sound like and how to sing those and how to be independent singers, and then singing in a group, starting to build harmony, understanding those first few intervals and scales. So anyway, that is the fundamentals there. And what to practice? Skill building exercises. So for skill building exercises, a method book will give you skill building exercises to train you in reading music, fingerings, and short tunes to apply your new skill. I did already mention some of that, but I'll show you. And here again, even for my vocalists, we have some of these basic things of just learning the first note and singing very simple rhythms. For an instrumentalist, just playing one note in a repeated pattern helps to stabilize the tone and develop an embouchure. An embouchure is the muscle structure of the mouth. We need to have a certain muscle strength in order to produce a stable tone. So for a trumpet player, that's going to be different than it is for a clarinet player or someone who has a reed, but you have to develop these muscles. So playing really basic exercises like this is going to help develop those muscles. Now, if you're a guitar player or a pianist, you need to develop the strength in the hands. For a pianist, we learned that this ring finger is the weakest finger, and we need lots of exercises to strengthen that. Guitarists have two independent hands. They have to develop the left hand for the exact pitches, and then the right hand is going to be strumming or picking. So having those very simple basic beginning exercises are going to train the muscles in the hands to develop that. Same thing for a string player. For a violin, again, two independent hands. The left hand is going to play the exact pitches, and the right hand is going to do the bowing, and you learn the bowing techniques. So very simple basic exercises to establish the first note, then the second note, then maybe the first 5 notes, just one note at a time, being very competent on those basic notes until you're able to build a scale, until you're able to build a small repertoire of notes where you can play melodies, okay? Next is how to practice, okay? This is getting into what you actually do when you have this information and you have this knowledge. So, number 1 is good technique. So, here are some tips that are important for any musician. It doesn't matter if you're a vocalist, percussionist, a wind player, very important. Most important thing is excellent posture. This is the foundation, the beginning of your good technique. Most players require wind. Singers, woodwind players, brass players. So that posture is paramount to getting a good breath, taking in right in through here, learning how to use the diaphragm in order to have a tone that's going to stabilize and sustain. So good posture is paramount. And even for other instruments, in order to use your arms well, however you're going to use your arms, you need to have a good structured posture in order to be very free with your instrument. Next, relaxed body. I cannot emphasize this enough. There can't be any tension in your body or you will have tension in your music. You need to relax the shoulders, have a free head, relaxed arms, and again, it doesn't matter what your instrument is. If you're playing trumpet, you need to have a relaxed body. This is going to open up airflow. It's going to open up the way you express your music through relaxed wrists, relaxed fingers, or for singers, a relaxed jaw, relaxed tongue. Your body needs to be relaxed, okay? A free, relaxed body is going to have a free, relaxed music coming from it. So, excellent posture, relaxed body. I've covered this, so let's go on. Next, this is the really important one, okay? This is slow and accurate. This requires patience and persistence. Now, oftentimes what happens, especially with beginning musicians, is that they're very eager to learn a song, they're very eager to express themselves musically, and so they want to learn as fast as possible. Well, there's a paradox here. If you learn slowly, you have better technique and you'll accelerate your learning. If you're trying to learn very fast and take as many shortcuts as possible, you'll shortchange yourself in the long run. Have you ever known a musician who could really only play one song? A friend who plays the same song every time they sit down to a piano, every time they pick up the guitar. They really only know one song, maybe two or three, or maybe three songs that are kind of sketchy. Well, maybe they wanted to learn the fast way. Rather than learning scales, rhythms, rather than taking time to learn to read music, or even the musicians who don't read music, to learn the scales orally and through their playing, a person who knows their scales, knows their rhythms, knows their chords, they have a foundation to be able to play many things. But it takes patience and persistence. And here is what I'm going to walk you through today. Here's where I want to spend most of the time. Okay? So, first of all, if you've been playing something and you know you've made a mistake, you want to stop at that exact spot where you've made a mistake. So let me take, for example, if we look at, this is a percussion book, and I can take a very simple melody, one of these beginning tunes, and this is for the mallets, to play on the mallets, but I could play it on the piano. If I play this slowly and carefully, then I've learned the tune. If I make a mistake, I need to stop and analyze. What was the mistake that was made? Was it the rhythm? Was it the pitch? Was it, for someone who's playing a wind instrument, was it the right fingering? Was it embouchure that affected the pitch? You have to isolate what was the problem. And then, secondly, you want to correct the mistake and then play it properly 3 times in a row. If it's difficult to play it exactly perfect 3 times in a row, then you need to slow it down. This is where the patience comes in handy, okay? It's necessary. So take a look here at the piano. Let's say this is my piano rehearsal. I have a little song here called Merrily We Roll Along, and it goes something like this. But let's say I made a mistake at some point. Let's say on the 3rd note I made a mistake. Didn't sound right, so what was the problem? And then I can see here that in the music I actually have a B flat. So there, right at that 3rd note, I have a B flat. So that would be the mistake that I needed to correct. So maybe if you're playing a wind instrument, maybe you needed to learn that fingering for the B flat rather than B natural. So you make the correction and then just play that small portion 3 times until you know you can play it perfectly 3 times in a row. So rather than playing the mistake and then continuing on and then playing the same mistake over again. I want to stop and just isolate maybe just those first 4 notes. And I can't emphasize enough using a metronome. So the other thing is, sometimes when you correct a mistake, it's difficult to play it perfectly and correctly, but you want to play it slow enough so that it is actually played perfectly. So get a metronome, and of course you can find a metronome on an app. Most people just have a phone. You can put everything on your app, all your tools, all your tuners, everything. So yes, you can use an app metronome, but this is an electric one. And I'm going to set it here. Right now I have 100 equals a quarter note. So if I'm playing this tune, but let's say that speed is too difficult and I still made a mistake, then what I'm going to do is slow it down. I put it all the way down to 84 equals a quarter note. So now I'm going to try it again. Maybe I find that's an exact tempo where I can do it correctly 3 times in a row. So I'm going to isolate that little measure and play it 3 times. I played 2 measures actually. It takes patience. 1 measure only would be this much. I played it correctly. Let me do it 2 more times to make a total of 3. Correct. Let me do that again. Now, once you find that you've learned that one spot correctly, then you want to put it into the context of the music and play accurately. Even if it's a slower tempo than it's meant to be, accuracy is the important part. So now I can play the whole song at a slower tempo. Slow tempo, that means I've learned it correctly. Now, once you know that you've played it correctly, you can bring the tempo up and challenge yourself. Can you now play it perfectly at the correct tempo? So now maybe you would take your metronome. I had it at 84, so I'm going to bring it up just a little bit. So from 84, I'm going to bring it up to 88. Can hardly hear the difference, right? But if you play it perfectly at that tempo and it's not difficult at all, then you stop and raise your metronome setting again. This time, let me raise it to 96. Is it still a challenge at 96, or do I get tripped up when I've moved it to 96? It's a little bit faster. You can hear a slight difference, but if it's still easy, then I can move up the tempo again until I reach the desired tempo. See, I switched it to 100. I don't know if you even noticed, but let's see how it sounds at 100. Keep it steady. And let's say I can play the whole song there. Go ahead and move it up. Maybe my goal is to play it at 112. Quarter note equals 112. Let's listen. That's a good tempo. That's a nice tempo for that song. So maybe that's your goal. Another little tip is once you can play it at the correct tempo, to challenge yourself, you may want to raise the metronome again. Can you play it accurately faster than you need to? Then that means you really have gotten that skill in. For example, again, if it was the B flat and you just learned the new fingering for that, if you can play it at a faster tempo, then you really have mastered that new note, that new fingering. Okay? And then of course, for your performance tempo, you would put it back and practice regularly at your performance tempo So then that tempo becomes internalized, and then you don't need a metronome. You're just used to playing it at that exact tempo. Okay, so that was the main thing I wanted to show you, is how to isolate a mistake, how to work through it, and then how to gain perfection from playing it correctly. But it takes patience. It takes patience. So I recommend you always use a metronome and always isolate that mistake down to the smallest part. For singers, a lot of time it's the right pitch, especially if you're in your choir and you're learning a part and you need to learn a harmony. It's easy to hear a melody, and a lot of times it's easy to hear a lower note. But if you're singing tenor or alto, sometimes those internal notes in the middle of a chord are harder to hear, and you have to practice that. So you'd want to isolate the exact interval, have it played or play on the piano yourself the exact interval you need in order to correct that mistake. And again, playing it over, listening, singing it over and over to memorize that exact interval that's necessary to sing your part. Like I said, mainly for altos and tenors with the internal parts. Okay? All right, and then let's take a look here. Again, one more time. My outline. I listed it twice here. Playing correctly at least 3 times before putting it back in context. We went over that. You're using a metronome and then playing it in time. And then lastly, play in context slowly so as to play it perfectly. Usually when you take that corrected mistake and you put it back in context, you usually have to play the whole thing slower so that you're not playing the easy parts fast and you're not playing the difficult parts slowly. Most music has a steady tempo or a steady beat unless the composer makes a change within the piece and notates that. But usually a piece of music has the same tempo throughout. So you don't want to play the easy parts fast and the difficult parts slow, or then your music will sound immature. It won't sound as flowing as it ought to. But that is this part called How to Practice. All right, now here's another key thing I want you to memorize, and that is to be consistent. Now, here's another place where a lot of beginning musicians fall off, and that is that they don't practice regularly. Excuse me. So I made a note here. It says practice regularly just as you would if you were training for a sport. Develop a regular schedule and stick with it in order to train the small muscles and your memory. So think about if you were a basketball player or a soccer player, or let's say you're a runner, and think about a coach training someone who's on the team. The coach wouldn't just say, show up randomly once a week and we'll do a little something, something. No, coaches are usually very strict, and they say you have to be here at these designated times, and we will be working out for this length of time, and we will be going through drills, and we will be going through scrimmages. So all of these things a coach does to help an athlete train physically in order to perform well during a game. It's really the same thing for musicians. It's just that we're training small muscles. So instead of training biceps and quads, we're sometimes just training a pinky finger, or we're training those teeny tiny vocal cords, or we're training the breathing. We need that breathing to happen a certain way at a certain time in order to produce certain notes. So those small muscles, some of them you can't even see, have to be trained. And we have to go through the same process an athlete goes through. All right, so here's what I recommend. If you're a serious musician and you really want to become very skilled and you want to do a lot of performing, maybe you just really thrive on that and you really have a desire for that, I really would recommend that you practice every day, 5 to 6 days per week, even if it's only for 15 to 20 minutes. Here is this little secret a lot of people don't know. Frequency is more important than quantity. So if you're practicing 2 hours on a Saturday and then you don't touch your instrument, or you don't sing, or you don't practice again for another week, it's really not good for your muscles. It's too far of a length of time for you to have been without that practice, and then the 2 hours is going to be fatiguing. Your coach wouldn't have you do that if you were playing in a sport. You wouldn't just train for a very long length of time and do a very hard workout and then not work out again for 7 days. It wouldn't be good for your muscles. Every day is good, especially if it is short and light and very specific. So if you can practice every day, 5 to 6 days a week, you're going to see a lot of progress, a lot. Now, a second option, which is more practical for most people, is practicing every other day, 3 or 4 times a week. And then in this case, I would request, or I would recommend at least 30 minutes of practice if you're practicing every other day. It's actually good for you to have a day of rest in between, especially if you're beginning and you're developing muscles. You may find that if you're learning to hold a certain instrument, that your muscles do get kind of sore and tired, just like an athlete would. It's just that they're smaller muscles, and you're learning to hold and to grip or to position a certain instrument. And every other day is good. But you want to spend at least 30 minutes, 45 minutes to an hour, if you're doing every other day, is really good. And if you do that over a long period of time, you will really grow as a musician. Last option is, and maybe you have certain time restrictions, practicing twice per week would be minimal growth, but you're still going to develop as a musician. And I would recommend keeping those times very consistent and very specific. Maybe you can really only practice on Mondays and Thursdays, or Mondays and Fridays, and you have a couple of days in between. In between times, if you're not able to physically practice, you can still do mental practice in between days. You can go through your book. You can still memorize fingerings in your mind. You can still do an air practice. If you just have your instrument with you and you're not blowing it, you're not playing it, you can still run your fingers over your instrument and still get the muscle memory into your hands. Or vocally, you can still sing through mentally. Think how you would shape a vowel, how you would articulate the words. You can whisper through all of the words of the song in rhythm. That's still practice. That's still rehearsal. And that will definitely get you by if you're only practicing a couple of times a week. Don't shortchange or underestimate the power of mental practice or silent practice. It's still exercising and running through your mind musical things. You can still go through rhythmically, melodically. You can still think of your chords mentally. It's still practice. It doesn't supplement a full practice, but it will reinforce your full practice. Okay? Now, last thing on this page is anything less than twice a week is really going to be minimal, almost like no musical growth. Maybe you will get a little bit out of it. Once a week, it's not enough. It's not going to build enough skill of any kind to really propel you forward as a musician. So, but you have to find what fits with you, for you, and what works for you. And there may be times in your life when you really can only practice once a week. As long as you know it's short term, and you can eventually get back to two or three or more times per week, you can still grow with that once per week if it's temporary. But that's the main lineup I had for you today. So just to review here on the big screen, perfect practice makes perfect, okay? So whenever you hear that saying again, just remember to modify it. It's perfect practice that makes perfect, okay? And the main thing that I wanted you to learn today from a little bit of the demonstration I gave you was to isolate your mistake and correct it, okay? And it's a lot easier if you have a teacher, but if you don't, you can manage. You can still find what is the problem and work it out. And of course, I'm always available. You can call me, email me, and I will help you to find the mistake if you're working somewhere remotely and you just really can't find the mistake. I'll help you as best I can. But you can isolate your mistake and correct it, okay? Next, play slow enough to always play accurately. I can't emphasize that enough. Playing accurately is the secret sauce. That's what's going to propel you forward and make you a better, more skilled musician. And then practice regularly so that you build musical memory and muscle memory, both, okay? You need to memorize, and when you practice regularly, you're going to memorize, and then your muscles are going to memorize what you do, just like an athlete does. When an athlete is playing a sport, they have to memorize the fine, specific way of hitting a ball or dodging an opponent. Those fine muscle memory skills are needed for musicians as well. It might be a little muscle in our finger, it might be our vocal cords, small muscles, it might be the diaphragm that we can't see externally. So practice regularly so that you build those muscles in muscle memory. So following this method, you will have great success. So I wish you well, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And remember, perfect practice makes perfect.